Shogun. Shogun was a unique experience, or should I say the first season of Shogun was a unique experience. If you are someone who has been watching my videos for a while, you would know the roller coaster I have been on with James Clavell's classic story. From someone who had originally only seen the 1980 miniseries but did not much enjoy it, but then reading the book and, for the most part, enjoying it, to then reviewing the new adaptation on FX and Hulu, which although had a lot of fantastic elements, still ended up being very underwhelming for me. At the end of it all, I was going to simply close things off with this new adaptation by thinking it was a solid yet ultimately disappointing experience, at least for me. If you want to watch my reviews of the series and each episode, I will link them down below. And obviously, I do know the show is widely beloved by many people, and that's great. I'm super happy for those who did enjoy it, and I can definitely understand why you would. For me, however, as you may know, I just felt like there were too many things they did not focus on enough from the original story, and also too many questionable changes that didn't help anything either. At the time, many other like-minded voices were chiming in to also say that the only real way they could have done the book any justice would have been to space the story out between several seasons, which I totally agree with. The story of Shogun is long, and I realize now should not be rushed, which sadly this new version did feel at times like they did. On top of this though, we were also repeatedly told by the showrunners that we were only going to be getting just one season. It was supposed to be a mini-series to just tell the story from the book, and that was it. And yeah, this one season sort of did tell the basic story of the book from start to finish, albeit like I said with somewhat of a shifted focus and a number of other changes. Well, I guess they never foresaw the show being a smash hit. Because yeah, it was, and now because of the amazing uproar it has received, we are going to be getting more seasons. At least 2 in fact. Now, at this point in time, who knows if they will eventually do more beyond that. But it really is quite wild, simply because how? The story ended, the tale was done, they finished it. Anything past this point is just making things up and runs the risk of seriously jumping the shark. I don't want to tune into Season 3, which takes place 30 years later and has a new cast of young heroes who have to sadly read the line, "Somehow Ishido returned." Now let's be fair, I don't think they are going to do that. And while this whole thing does reek of corporate greed trying to cash in on the success of the first season, there are obviously interesting places future seasons could go if they are done right. Some people have brought up the idea of doing prequel seasons, flashbacks to a younger Toranaga, perhaps during the time of either of the previous great unifiers. This would be totally cool to see, as we could also bring back younger versions of plenty of the fan-favorite characters who may or may not have survived the first season. However, the more I think about it, there is a better path, or at least a path that I personally think would be more interesting. And it does allow us to still pull from real history. Sort of. So here are my own ideas of where I would like them to take seasons 2 and 3, and why I believe that taking this route would perhaps be the best way to do it all, in my opinion. Once again, this is all operating under the assumption that 3 seasons will be the max, and there will be no more than that. Now, let's start off with Season 2. My idea picks things up right in the aftermath of Season 1. Perhaps a few months to maybe a few years later, but not long. And the biggest thing right away is that Ishido is still alive. Surprise, surprise. But here's the deal. Although we were told how Ishido was executed in the book following the Battle of Sekigahara, we got no such mention of his fate at the end of the first season, only that the other regions would likely turn on him. So the door is certainly open for him to still be alive, potentially. Perhaps after his defeat at Sekigahara, he fled and was able to go into hiding. Or maybe, faced with the fact that the heir's army was not going to arrive to aid him, he simply submitted to Toranaga right there and was later sent into exile. Regardless, Ishido is still alive. I feel it is extremely important to keep him alive, because he is such a fantastic character and a great adversary to Toranaga. Not to mention the fact that I think we can all agree that Ishido, who was played brilliantly by Takahiro Hira, was one of the best characters of the entire first season. We need him still around. I know this goes against history in terms of the real figure he is based off of, that of Ishida Mitsunari, but honestly, with the deviations from history they have already made, I don't think this change would be catastrophic and would actually serve a second season quite well. Now obviously, Toranaga is on the fast track to becoming Shogun, which we will see happen, and following this, he will lock down Ochiba and the heir in Osaka, as Ochiba will now come to realize how stupid of a decision she made by not sending the heir's armies to support Ishido at Sekigahara. But remember, in this version, Ishido is still alive, and will soon find his way out of hiding or exile and back to Osaka, perhaps with the help of another valiant and idealistic warrior who could occupy the role of the historical figure, Sanada Yukimura. I think a character like Yukimura would make an excellent addition to the story, as someone in support of the heir and doing what he believes to be just, with his view of Toranaga being obviously a usurper. So now we have Ishido and Yukimura in Osaka, with Ochiba and the heir. Now it's their turn to begin scheming. How can they take power back, while toppling Toranaga's new shogunate and restoring the Taiko's heir to his rightful destiny? But I bet you're wondering, what is going on now with Blackthorn during all this? Well, he is still grappling with the loss of Mariko, but he is also building new friendships with Buntaro and perhaps Omi. As we know, he is still trying to rebuild his ship, but we also know that Toranaga is likely not going to let him complete it, or at least destroy it when it is complete. However, Toranaga will also need Blackthorn now more than ever, as now that he is in control of the country, he will need Blackthorn's help in his dealings with the Portuguese and Jesuits. As through Blackthorn, Toranaga will finally be able to cut through the lies that have been spun and will begin the process of removing the Portuguese and Jesuit influence from Japan. This will force them to secretly turn their allegiance fully back to the heir, smuggling them more weaponry to use at Osaka against Toranaga. Toranaga and his new shogunate will not be something widely enjoyed by all of Japan, especially after he kept publicly proclaiming he had no intention of being shogun. Soon, many samurai and ronin both loyal to the Taiko's regime and anti-Toranaga will begin flocking to Osaka Castle, much like in real history. However, we will be bumping up the timeline as well. While the siege of Osaka occurred throughout 1614 and 1615 in real history, for this version of the story we'll be setting it far earlier, as I've been saying, having it occur months if not a couple years after the end of the first season. The buildup of military forces in Osaka is not something that Toranaga will be able to ignore, and soon he will order his loyal armies to converge on the castle. Perhaps this whole event will even start to take a mental toll on Toranaga, as he'll become more prone to frequent nightmares of all the friends and allies he has lost along the way so far, being faced with yet another obstacle that could potentially lead to everything he has worked towards being undone. The siege will occur in two phases. The initial portion of the siege occurring in the midpoint of the season, and the end of the siege occurring by the end of the season. The initial portion will concern the winter siege, in which Toranaga will be completely repelled, suffering heavy losses. This will be the first time we will see Toranaga's army bested, and will only serve to worsen his nightmares. However, he still has other tricks up his sleeve, as he will then resort to bombarding the castle with his artillery unit that Blackthorn trained. This reflects the events of real history, as following a prolonged bombardment, a brief truce would be reached, in which Toranaga will be able to demolish portions of the wall, making it easier for when his armies return later, which they do by the summer. In this portion of the siege, the defenders who are denied the full protection of the castle will attempt to be more proactive, meeting Toranaga's forces in the field, yet they will ultimately be pushed back. This will be the conclusion of the siege, as Toranaga will finally destroy the heir and Ishido, who will die with the destruction of the castle. Yet, just like in real history, Toranaga will also come close to losing his own life in the final encounter, as Yukimura will nearly take him out in a last desperate charge. And at some point during this final encounter, or perhaps even during the final clash with Yukimura, Omi will unfortunately be killed. So now with Izu without a lord, Toranaga will be able to divide it up, and see fit to grant at least rule of Anjiro to Blackthorn for his loyalty. Season 2 will end with Japan at a more definitive peace. However, there is still the threat of the Portuguese, Jesuits, and Christian daimyo, who are secretly becoming more and more opposed to Toranaga. This is where we will then move on to Season 3, where everything will then come to a head with them. The main conflict of Season 3 will be the Shimabara Rebellion, which, although in real history occurred in the late 1630s, will here occur maybe 5 or so years after the end of Season 2. Japan has now endured the rule of the new shogunate for some time, and all Europeans, besides Blackthorn, have been restricted to Nagasaki in Kyushu. And speaking of Blackthorn, he has finally finished building his new ship, and as expected, Toranaga is planning to destroy it yet again. However, his attention is turned away when he gets news of a peasant revolt in Shimabara, all the way over in Kyushu near Nagasaki. Although historically, the Shimabara rebellion was caused more by the suffering of the peasants under the cruelty of their Matsukura overlords, here we will center it more around the growing conflict with the Christians and their increased persecution. This time, the Portuguese are going to take a more direct role in helping the rebels, supplying them with arms and perhaps even manpower, being that they see this as the last chance to regain their influence in Japan. Toranaga's response to the rebellion will be swift and sharp, yet in doing so he will also cause the revolt of the Christian daimyo at long last as well, who will throw their support in with the rebels. The shogunate's forces will not only be diverted on several fronts, but also denied a quick victory, as the entrenched, well-armed rebels will resort to a campaign of brutal guerrilla warfare. They will claim the prominent stronghold of Hara Castle, where the shogunate will once again mount several more failed assaults. By this point, his nightmares from the previous season have returned and are getting worse. But all is not lost yet. Toranaga will then actually decide to use Blackthorn's new ship as a means to bombard the castle from the sea. This mirrors real history, where the Dutch lent their support in the form of naval bombardment against the rebels at Shimabara. Yet to do this here, Blackthorn will also have to face off in naval combat against his old Portuguese rivals at sea, perhaps even having to fight his old friend Rodriguez. In the process, Blackthorn's ship will end up being destroyed, but not before dealing some significant damage to the castle. With a breach in the wall made, the attackers will attempt another assault, this time forcing their way in to at last destroy the rebel army. With this, the shogunate forces will ultimately claim victory, and Blackthorn will later be rescued from the sea. In the aftermath, the Portuguese and Jesuits will be fully expelled from Japan, and all European trade will be further restricted to Dejima, where only the Dutch will end up operating out of. From this, we will see the start of the isolation policies, which will serve to close off much of Japan to the west for most of the remainder of the Edo period. The Christian daimyo as well will be dealt with, and the country will move further under the iron grip of the shogunate. In the following weeks, Toranaga will meet with a recovering Blackthorn in Anjiro, and will finally reveal everything to him, in the same type of final moment we received between him and Yabu. However, this time, after everything is revealed to Blackthorn, Toranaga's intent to become shogun all along, his secret plans with Mariko, and even his intention to destroy Blackthorn's ship, he will finally say that Blackthorn can leave Japan if he truly desires to. Toranaga, after everything he has been through with Blackthorn, and especially given the nightmares of his old friends and allies who have died in his name, has decided to let Blackthorn go, to let him choose his own fate. And this is where the series will conclude in a bit of an open-ended fashion. Blackthorn may start building yet another ship, or he may not. We don't know what he will decide to do. Stay in Japan, or leave. Regardless though, we are left with a glimpse of a man who has truly earned his freedom, yet must decide if he wants to leave the life of significant status in Japan, or return home to his humble life in England with the wife and children he left behind. Alright, so these are my ideas for what I would ideally like to see for seasons 2 and 3 of Shogun. I know I certainly did not cover every detail and was more than a bit vague, but this was just a general outline. I obviously don't know what they are going to do with seasons 2 and 3, and I sincerely hope they don't botch the whole thing. I just feel that this would perhaps be the best way to do it. But who knows? Maybe there is an even better way out there I didn't even consider. And this is where I will turn things over to you. What would you like to see out of seasons 2 and 3 of Shogun? Do you like my suggestions? Would you change anything about them? Are you even happy at all that they are doing more seasons? Let me know in the comments below. Yet with that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.